different backgrounds. Actually, there's a huge amount of common ground when it comes to what is in the best interests.
Online censorship.
Mr. President, you have a successful social media site. There are new powers here to censor your site, state-mandated powers.
To censor my site?
To censor your site and Twitter and Facebook.
Truth,
I mean truth. Is that okay?
Well, I don't think he's going to censor my site because I say only good things. Will you please uncensor my site?
Yeah, we're not censoring anyone.
Donald Trump, how was he?
It was a really good meeting. We had dinner together.
Do you have a burger? Or steak? Doesn't he have steak
He didn't
every
have
meal?
steak on that occasion. He had chicken. He flew up.
They have one of the worst mayors anywhere in the world in London. A stupid guy, in my opinion, but he's a nasty man. So many people said thank you for saying that. He's a bad guy. Khan is
London Mayor, you're a disgrace. You're disgusting. You do not deserve to be in that position. Not when the welfare, the well-being, the dignity, the integrity, the safety and the innocence of children in the capital city is at stake. You are the most deplorable, despicable, horrible human being to answer that question like that. Now you get back in that seat, you answer the question properly, you get the stats, you hold the police to account. That is what you're supposed to be doing. That is what I'm paying you to do. As someone who pays taxes, living in London, I should expect no less. The country should expect no less. You disgust me.
You know, politics is pretty simple. It's, I assume there's a thing going on between you and Nigel, and it's okay. You know, it's two parties. But generally speaking, the one who cuts taxes the most, the one who gives you the lowest energy prices and the best kind of energy, the one that keeps you out of wars, he's kept you out of wars, but the one that keeps you out of wars, you know, you have a few basics and you can go back 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, whoever does these things, but low taxes, keep us safe, keep us out of wars, no crime, stop the crime, and in your case, a big immigration component, you know, because I know that your attitude has become strong on immigration, strong on the toughness of immigration, but I think whoever's going to be, I think I won because...
Free speech today.
Well, free speech is very important. I don't know if you're referring to any place in particular. Perhaps they are, but
We've had free speech for a very, very long time here, so we're very proud about that.
A storm is brewing between London and Washington, and it's about to explode. Donald Trump has sent a furious warning straight to Prime Minister Keir Starmer, accusing him of silencing free speech and putting illegal migrants in luxury hotels while Britain's veterans sleep on the streets. But here's the twist. King Charles is quietly standing with Trump. What happens next could shake UK-US relations to their core. For Starmer, this was no ordinary criticism. This was an international dressing down from the leader of Britain's most powerful ally, broadcast for the world to see. Trump's fury was not contained to a single issue. He linked the deeply controversial Online Safety Act, branded by opponents as a state-backed censorship weapon, with the mounting outrage over Britain's lavish treatment of asylum seekers. By combining these two scandals into a single devastating narrative, Trump painted a picture of a government that was both morally adrift and dangerously authoritarian. You don't tell Americans what they can and can't say, Trump thundered. And you don't put people who broke the law into five-star hotels while your heroes sleep on the streets. The bluntness of his words cut through the usual political noise, leaving even seasoned commentators stunned. Inside Downing Street, Starmer's reaction was immediate and intense. According to sources, he was visibly angered, not just by Trump's accusations, but by the audacity of what he saw as foreign interference in the UK's internal affairs. Privately, he complained that Trump's intervention was a deliberate attempt to undermine his government, a calculated move to embolden his political enemies at home. But if Starmer expected sympathy, he found none in the most unexpected place, Buckingham Palace. King Charles, while careful not to endorse Trump's style, is said to have shared concerns about the treatment of veterans and the dangers of excessive state control over speech. Courtiers hinted that the king, mindful of his role as a symbol of national unity, could not ignore the growing public anger over policies that appeared to reward those who circumvented the law while neglecting those who served it. This alignment between the US president and the British monarch created a political storm unlike anything seen in recent memory. The government now faced not just an opposition party eager to capitalise on the controversy, but also the combined weight of America's bluntest political voice and the quiet moral authority of the Crown. Across the country, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Social media erupted with hashtags like Veterans Before Migrants and Free Speech Under Threat. driven by ordinary citizens who felt that the government had lost touch with its most basic responsibilities. For many, Trump's message, however abrasive, struck a chord. They saw a leader willing to say out loud what their own politicians refused to acknowledge. And with King Charles subtly reinforcing those concerns, Starmer found himself increasingly isolated in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, in Washington, the State Department made it clear that Trump's comments were not off-the-cuff bluster. Officials confirmed that the White House had been monitoring the Online Safety Act for weeks, warning that its sweeping powers could affect American companies like X, Reddit, and Discord, forcing them to comply with UK content restrictions or face crushing penalties. To Trump, this was unacceptable, not just as a matter of policy, but as an affront to the core American principle of free expression. You start letting other countries decide what our people can say, he warned, and you lose the very freedom that built our nations. It was a message designed to resonate not just in the US, but across Britain, where many now fear that the Online Safety Act represents the thin edge of a very dangerous wedge. And with the migrant hotel scandal still raging, Trump's intervention was like gasoline poured on an already roaring fire. As the dust from Trump's televised warning began to settle, the real political fallout was only just beginning. Keir Starmer found himself boxed in from every direction, Washington's anger on one side, growing unrest at home on the other, and now the quiet but unmistakable moral pressure from King Charles. In normal times, a Prime Minister could try to downplay foreign criticism, call it just politics, and move on. But this was different. Trump's words had landed with precision, hitting two of the most sensitive fault lines in British politics: free speech and immigration. The Online Safety Act had already faced fierce domestic opposition, with Reform UK, civil liberties groups, and even members of Starmer's own party warning that it handed the state dangerous control over what could and could not be said online. Now, with the President of the United States publicly condemning it, the legislation was no longer just a national debate. It was an international flashpoint. Every major news outlet on both sides of the Atlantic was running with the story, and the narrative was slipping further and further from Starmer's grasp. Even worse, the migrant hotel scandal was providing the perfect moral backdrop for Trump's accusations. Every new image of former soldiers sleeping rough while migrants dined in hotel restaurants seemed to prove Trump's point. The optics were brutal, and Starmer knew it. Inside Parliament, the opposition wasted no time sharpening their attacks. Nigel Farage, seizing the moment, declared that Trump is saying what millions in Britain already believe, that our leaders have abandoned their duty to their own people. Conservative MPs who had been cautiously silent on the Online Safety Act began hinting that it might need review, sensing the public mood shifting rapidly. Even some Labour backbenchers, wary of defending what was increasingly being called Starmer's censorship law, began calling for clarifications to ensure it wouldn't infringe on free expression. The Prime Minister's allies tried to push back, insisting that Trump was interfering in domestic politics and that the migrant accommodation policy was a matter of basic humanitarian obligation. But their arguments sounded hollow in the face of mounting public anger. The problem was not just the policies themselves, it was the perception of a government that was out of touch, spending generously on those who entered illegally, while leaving veterans and struggling families to fend for themselves. And perception in politics often matters more than reality. Behind closed doors, the tension between Downing Street and Buckingham Palace was becoming harder to ignore. While the king was not openly criticising the government, Palace insiders were quietly letting it be known that he had deep concerns about both the veteran homelessness crisis and the principle of protecting free speech. For a constitutional monarch, such signals carry enormous weight, not because they dictate policy, but because they influence public sentiment. Starmer understood this all too well. He had been trying to project an image of firm, competent leadership, but the subtle alignment between the monarch and the US president was eroding that image day by day. The British public might not always agree with Trump's style, but many agreed with his message, and now that message carried the implicit moral approval of their own king. The pressure was mounting, and every passing hour without a decisive response made Starmer appear weaker. The markets, too, began to take notice. Reports surfaced that several US tech firms were reconsidering expansion plans in the UK, citing uncertainty over how the Online Safety Act would be enforced. Investors, always sensitive to political instability, grew nervous at the prospect of a prolonged diplomatic spat with Washington. In this climate, even a hint of tension between the UK and US could have ripple effects, from trade negotiations to military cooperation. The very idea that the White House might view Britain as an unreliable or hostile regulatory environment sent shivers through the business community. And yet, Starmer appeared trapped. To publicly soften his stance on the Online Safety Act would be seen as caving to Trump, something his pride and political instincts would not allow. To stand firm risked further alienating both American and British public opinion, as well as deepening the divide with the monarchy. By midweek, the story had fully escaped Downing Street's control. Hashtags like #StandWithTrump and #veterans first were trending daily, often alongside clips of the president's original remarks and images of homeless veterans. Talk radio was flooded with callers furious at the government's priorities, and editorial pages that had once been cautiously supportive of Starmer began questioning whether he truly understood the mood of the country. In every pub, coffee shop, and workplace, the same questions were being asked. Why was the government willing to spend millions housing people who arrived illegally while failing to provide shelter for those who served their country? And why was the Prime Minister so determined to regulate speech that Americans, and now even the King, were warning against? The scandal had reached a point where even if Starmer weathered it politically, the damage to his image as a strong, principled leader could be lasting. Trump had not just thrown down a challenge, he had redefined the battlefield, and for the first time in months, it was Starmer who was fighting on the defensive. The week took a darker turn when Trump doubled down on his attack, this time in a primetime interview with one of America's largest news networks, an interview that was beamed straight into millions of British homes. Speaking with his trademark bluntness, Trump accused Keir Starmer of running Britain like a failing corporation, warning that the UK was on a dangerous path if it continued to reward lawbreakers and censor honest people. His tone was sharper, more personal, and his words carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had no intention of backing down. "This isn't just about free speech," he told the interviewer. "This is about values. Britain used to stand for freedom. It used to stand for courage. Now you've got leaders who are scared of open debate and more worried about illegal migrants than their own heroes. That's a disgrace." The clip went viral almost instantly, shared across social media with captions that painted Trump as the defender of Britain's forgotten citizens. And as much as Starmer's allies tried to dismiss it as grandstanding from across the Atlantic, the public wasn't buying it. Inside Number 10, the mood was tense. Starmer, already bristling at Trump's first intervention, was now furious at what he saw as an orchestrated campaign to undermine his authority. Advisors urged him to deliver a strong public rebuttal, one that would frame Trump's remarks as inappropriate meddling in sovereign affairs. But every draft statement seemed to carry the same risk, that he would appear defensive, reactive, and trapped in Trump's media game. The Prime Minister's hesitation was beginning to look like weakness, and in politics, weakness is blood in the water. The opposition sensed it. Nigel Farage took to the airwaves again, declaring that Trump's right, this government has lost its moral compass. Conservative MPs, emboldened by the backlash, began calling for the Online Safety Act to be reviewed in Parliament, with some openly suggesting it should be scrapped entirely. Even Labour's own backbenchers began whispering about the need to rethink parts of the law, fearing it could become an electoral liability. Adding to the crisis was a fresh wave of revelations about the migrant hotel scandal. Investigative reports uncovered contracts showing that the government had paid some hotel chains more than £250 per room per night, far above standard rates, to house asylum seekers. Pictures of plush suites with sea views, fully equipped gyms, and unlimited buffets filled the evening news, contrasted against footage of homeless veterans huddled in doorways. The juxtaposition was damning, and Trump's earlier comments now rang even louder in the public's ears. On phone-ins and comment sections, people voiced a growing sense of betrayal. Why was the government bending over backwards to accommodate those who broke the rules, while turning its back on those who defended the country? Starmer's ministers tried to defend the policy as a temporary measure, but by now the damage was done. The images told their own story, and it was one of misplaced priorities. The diplomatic strain was becoming impossible to ignore. Senior civil servants warned that US-UK relations were entering uncharted territory, with the White House privately pressing for assurances that the Online Safety Act would not be used to target American companies or content. Tech giants were already making contingency plans, from lobbying campaigns to potential relocation of certain operations out of Britain. Trade negotiators feared that the long-discussed UK-US free trade deal could quietly stall, a move that would be politically disastrous for Starmer. Yet despite all this, the Prime Minister remained adamant that Britain would make its own laws without interference. It was a line meant to project strength, but critics saw it as stubbornness, and Trump was quick to seize on it, framing it as proof that Starmer was more concerned with political pride than the welfare of his people. And then came the twist that no one saw coming. A carefully worded statement from Buckingham Palace. Without directly naming Trump or Starmer, King Charles spoke at a veterans' charity event, praising those who served this nation, who deserve our utmost respect, care and gratitude, before all others. It was subtle, but the timing was unmistakable. The message, whether intentional or not, aligned perfectly with Trump's central argument. Newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic seized on it, running headlines that suggested the king had sided, at least morally, with the US president. Starmer's allies scrambled to play it down, insisting that the monarch had merely been speaking about charity work. But the damage was already done. The image of the king and Trump, however different in style and politics, appearing to agree on a fundamental moral principle, was devastating to a prime minister already on the ropes. For millions watching, the question was no longer whether Trump had a point. It was why their own leader seemed so unwilling to acknowledge it. What began as a fiery warning from Trump had evolved into a full-blown test of Keir Starmer's leadership, a test he was visibly struggling to pass. Every day, new headlines seemed to tighten the noose. Leaked memos from civil servants warning of the reputational cost of the migrant hotel policy. Veterans groups launching petitions demanding urgent government action and fresh opinion polls showing a sharp drop in public trust for the Prime Minister. The numbers were brutal. Starmer's approval ratings had slid into negative territory for the first time since taking office, while support for Reform UK surged as Nigel Farage skillfully rode the wave of populist anger. On social media, clips of Trump's original warning were still circulating like wildfire, now spliced with images of veterans sleeping rough, overcrowded hotel lobbies and headlines about censorship. The narrative had become self-sustaining, feeding on its own momentum, and Starmer was caught in the undertow. Behind closed doors, the Prime Minister's inner circle was fracturing. Some advisers urged a complete reversal of the most controversial aspects of the Online Safety Act, paired with a visible crackdown on illegal immigration to reclaim the initiative. Others warned that backtracking would be political suicide, painting Starmer as weak and easily swayed by foreign pressure. The dilemma was brutal. Hold the line and risk a slow, painful bleed of credibility or change course, and confirm Trump as the man who forced Britain's hand. Each option carried its own dangers, and Starmer knew that whatever decision he made could define the rest of his premiership. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Trump showed no signs of letting up. In a rally in Ohio, he once again brought up the UK, telling thousands of cheering supporters that even the king gets it, veterans first, no excuses, drawing one of the loudest ovations of the night. The line was picked up instantly by British tabloids, ensuring it would dominate the next day's political coverage. Diplomatic channels were now openly strained. Senior British and American officials were engaged in a quiet but intense back and forth, trying to prevent the dispute from spiralling into a broader diplomatic rift. But the reality was hard to ignore. The UK's most important ally was publicly calling out its leader, and the leader in question was losing the public argument. The White House, while careful to avoid being seen as openly hostile, was privately making it clear that relations could suffer if the UK's regulatory direction threatened American interests. For Starmer, this was the nightmare scenario, a domestic crisis bleeding into the international arena, with his opponents at home and abroad seemingly aligned against him. The calls from MPs for a policy rethink grew louder, and whispers of a possible leadership challenge began to circulate in Westminster's back corridors. And then came the moment that crystallised the entire saga. At Prime Minister's questions, Starmer was confronted by a Conservative MP who, holding up a printed photo of a homeless veteran, asked, "Prime Minister, can you tell this man why you think it's more important to silence Americans online than to give him a home?" The chamber erupted, some in cheers, others in jeers, but the damage was instant. The clip went viral within hours, shared by Trump himself with the caption, "This is the question Britain deserves answered." For millions watching, it was the perfect distillation of the crisis. A government accused of having the wrong priorities, a prime minister looking cornered, and a foreign leader framing himself as the champion of Britain's own people. By the week's end, the political fallout was undeniable. Starmer's authority had been shaken, his international standing questioned, and his domestic credibility eroded. Trump, whether by design or instinct, had struck a nerve that resonated deeply with the British public. And with the quiet backing of King Charles, the moral weight of the argument seemed to lean heavily against the Prime Minister. What had started as a cross-Atlantic clash over policy had become something far more damaging, a symbolic battle over the soul of Britain, fought in the court of public opinion. And in that court, at least for now, Keir Starmer was on the losing side.